Often when people say their photos look a bit dull, the thought might be, maybe I need a better camera, maybe one with a nicer colour science. But honestly, after trying lots of different cameras, I've realised it's almost never the camera. Even very ordinary cameras can produce beautiful colour if you work with the right light and make a few simple choices while shooting and editing. So in this video, I would like to share how I go about getting nice natural colours in my photos. So welcome back to another video. So if you're new here, my name's Ian and I'm a landscape photographer based here in the UK. And I get asked a lot about how I achieve natural balanced colours in my photos. So I really want to kind of deep dive into this today because, you know, when you really start paying attention to it, it's one of the things that can completely transform your photography. So whether you're shooting on a phone, on a point and shoot or a pro level camera, the principles are pretty much the same, I think. So I'm going to share some of the things that have kind of helped me go from making images that I guess felt a little bit dull and maybe a bit muddy to ones that actually feel like kind of what I experienced when I was actually standing there staring at that amazing viewpoint. So let's get straight into it, shall we? So firstly, before we get into the good stuff, I just want to kind of talk about a few things I do in camera to help me get nice natural colours. Now, if you're someone that kind of likes editing your photos like I do, then I would definitely advise shooting in RAW because that will give you the most flexibility when you take your images into post-production. For example, you can change things like your white balance later without degrading the quality of your photos. But if you're a JPEG shooter, I would advise getting the look you're after as close as possible at the time of shooting to what you wish the final image to look like. Because, you know, those colour choices that you make in camera are baked into the JPEG. You can manipulate it a little bit later on, but it is not as flexible as a RAW file. Now the next setting that you may wish to consider is white balance. Now I typically leave mine in auto because I shoot in RAW and I know that I can change this later on in post-production. But if you shoot in JPEG, I would advise getting the white balance correct at the time of shooting, or as near as you can. You can try, you know, auto if you like, or you maybe can try one of the other presets like cloudy or shady, or even dial in your own by choosing a Kelvin value. Now, when shooting in JPEG, it might be worth trying, say, cloudy or even shady white balance settings at sunset because, you know, if you're shooting in auto, typically the auto white balance might overcorrect the warmth that you have and make the image appear cooler. So by setting your white balance to shady or cloudy, it might just warm that image up for you and maybe give you a true representation of what it's actually like during golden hour. That's something I do quite a lot because I shoot in RAW and JPEG. It's nice for me to have a JPEG file should I wish to just maybe share it quickly or use it for something else and I don't want to do an edit on it. So I'm always kind of mindful of my colour whilst shooting. Another thing you could do is dial in your own white balance setting. You can change the temperature, the Kelvin value of your white balance in a lot of cameras, and that might be something that you might find interesting to get the exact colour that you're looking for. Another really powerful in-camera tool that can really help is the histogram. So if you're not familiar with the histogram, it's a graph that shows you how many pixels in your frame fall within a particular luminance value. And the graph represents pure white on the right and pure black on the left, and all the other tones kind of fit somewhere in between. And the height of the graph is how many pixels there are of that particular tone. So I'd advise, if your camera supports it, to have your live histogram visible when you're actually shooting. If you can't do this, you may be able to take a shot and view it retrospectively in playback. Either way, it's a tool that can really help with colour because if your exposure is right, typically the colours will be decent straight off the bat as well. An under or overexposed shot will often require more colour manipulation in post-production. Another tip is, and of course if you have this available in your camera, is to check your RGB histogram. So the RGB histogram shows the luminance of separate colour channels. And I've noticed sometimes that one of these channels might be showing that it's overexposed or clipping when my luminance histogram is saying everything is fine. And this happens a fair bit with skies on my Fuji camera. So it's always worth checking this if possible, because if one of the RGB channels is overexposed, there might not be any recoverable detail in those areas. For example, if it's just a solid block of colour in the sky, which isn't ideal, it might be very, very difficult to, adjust the color and luminance of that in editing. You might end up getting a bit of banding. Another thing you can do at the time of shooting is to choose a picture profile that best represents the look that you're going for. And this is especially true for JPEG shooters. In fact, this is something that's become very popular over the last few years. You might have heard of the term recipes. Well, that's basically an in-camera edit. You're setting the camera to manipulate the colors in a certain way. And a lot of cameras have particular profiles, and this will change things like contrast and saturation, as well as shifting the colors around. I'm shooting with the OM1 Mark II here, and this has picture profiles like vivid, natural, and muted, while on the Fuji X-H2, which is filming me right now, I've got film simulations like classic chrome and Velvia. And each camera is a little bit different in this regard, but most give you the option to change things like your shadows and your highlights, and also your colors within these profiles, which can be great for getting the colors to look just how you would like them. Now, as mentioned, when these settings are combined, it becomes a recipe. Personally, I like to set mine up for a very natural look. So on the OM1 Mark II, I've got mine set up to natural, and on my Fuji camera, I've got mine set to Provia, which again is a pretty neutral look. Now, personally, I'm not really looking for a super stylized look. I prefer to create my images with a very kind of natural feel to them. But, you know, this works for me, but it might not work for you. So I guess just play around and kind of work out what works for the style that you like to shoot in. Now, one thing I should say is that picture profiles show you how an image can look. They change the appearance in the LCD and the EVF, and it's also applied to the JPEG, but it's not applied to the RAW file. So when you get your RAW into the edit, if you want the same look, you're going to need to search for the profile and apply it there before you start your edit, or you can just use the standard Adobe color profile and edit like I do. The thing to look out for though is the picture profiles almost always are more contrasty than the RAW file, and the live histogram in camera in most cases represents the picture profile that's being displayed on the LCD and not the RAW image. So if you do shoot in RAW, then I think it's useful to choose a fairly neutral or flat picture profile so the histogram is fairly consistent with the RAW. On my Fuji, I've got a setting called Natural Live View, which strips the LCD of the picture profile and shows the RAW image, which of course changes the appearance of the image, but it also changes the appearance of the histogram as well. It's now more consistent to what the RAW file is actually like in terms of its highlights and shadows, which is really, really helpful. I've got this set up to a simple swipe up on my screen so I can check my exposure in really difficult or challenging lighting situations. So there is a bit of discrepancy between, you know, the picture profile's histogram and what your RAW file is actually truly like. So yeah, if you were to take a look at both in your editing software and what it looks like on the back of the screen with the picture profile applied, the two histograms will look very different in some cases. Now, if you'd like to dive deeper into camera technique and also landscape photography composition, I have two ebooks that are available for you. It's basically a step-by-step guide to how I go about creating the photos that I create. And they've become very, very popular, and I've received some amazing feedback from them. So thank you for everybody that's purchased one already. And yeah, they come highly recommended. So I'll leave a link in the video description, or you can scan the QR code that's on the screen somewhere, and that will take you over there and give you a bit more information about what's involved with them. So yeah, thanks in advance for checking those out. So I want to talk about how light can affect colour in your images in just a second, but before that I want to sort of dive into editing a little bit. So there's a few tips that we can do in the edit to make sure that we get nice accurate colours, and of course bring that RAW file back to life. So typically the RAW file will lack contrast and colour, and I usually start by choosing the Adobe color profile at the top here in the basic panel as my starting point. So one of the first things I do is get my white balance looking pretty decent. And to be honest, this is probably one of the biggest challenges I think when colouring an image. Our eyes tend to adjust, don't they? So, you know, if you say spend a few hours working on a magenta sunset image and then start editing a green forest shot, our eyes might kind of trick us a little bit and think, maybe lead us to think maybe the green is too green, or maybe even not green enough, depending how your eyes react. So I think taking a break every so often is definitely key when you're colouring your photos. And it's something I highly recommend that you do. I do it all of the time. I work on one image, go away and come back and maybe start working on another one if I've got quite a complex colouring edit to do. Now with the white balance, we can use the white balance picker tool and choose somewhere neutral, and it will correct that image based on that area that we've selected. But honestly, I don't think this is particularly great for landscape type shots. I found the best way is just kind of eyeing it to get the look you want. Now, sometimes if I'm struggling a bit, I'll boost the saturation all the way up to 100% and then adjust the white balance from there, because it can be easier to see the colours shifting. And then I just tend to dial back the saturation when I've kind of got the colour where I think it might need to be. Another tool I like to use to add contrast and colour is the tone curve. Now my editing techniques tend to ebb and flow a little bit. I used to use it all of the time, then I kind of stopped using it and now I've gone back to it again. But you know, I think it's a really handy tool nonetheless. A nice gradual S-curve can really bring a raw file to life, and the colours get richer as the contrast is enhanced as well. Quite often with a really well lit image, the tone curve is actually all you really need to bring it back to life. Now, one of the biggest obstacles with a lot of images is colour casts, and this is so difficult to spot, let alone correct. But there is a powerful little trick you can do in Photoshop that 95% of the time will get rid of your cast with just a couple of clicks. So if you're not sure what a colour cast is, it's essentially a wash of colour throughout the whole entire image. Now I think usually in the natural world we don't see a wash of colour over absolutely everything. Now typically the shadows and the highlights will take on a different hue, which adds colour contrast to the scene, as opposed to I think just one single colour throughout. Now you can see this in this image here, it's got a really strong magenta cast. Now there was magenta in the shot, it was sunset, so I don't want to get rid of that, but I do want to keep some colour depth as well and not just have this big wash of colour throughout. So first let's just open this in Photoshop, and then I'm going to come up to the curves adjustment layer, then click on auto while holding down the Alt key, and it will bring this little box up where we can choose a few different settings. Now typically I'll choose one of the top two, either enhance monochromatic contrast or enhance per channel contrast. And also toggle on the snap neutral midtones checkbox. So yeah, basically I take a look at these to see if it takes away the colour cast, and if there is one of course. Now if you think it's removed too much of the colour wash in your image, you can simply drop the opacity of that layer down, or even paint away some of the effect with a black brush on your layer mask. And when you're done, you can just save the file back into Lightroom. Now this technique has saved so many of my images, it's unbelievable. I should say as well that the cast in this image was very, very strong, but I would say most images have some kind of colour contrast running through them, and it can be very, very difficult to spot, especially the subtle ones. So yeah, this is a great little sort of powerful tool that you can use just to test whether your image has a colour cast, and if you want to get rid of it or not. It's a great tool to do that as well. Now another step I often take is to manipulate colours locally as well as maybe globally. So for example, in the basics tab at the top in Lightroom, when we adjust the white balance, we're changing the white balance to the whole of the shot, the colour in the whole of the image. Whereas with a local adjustment like the brush tool, we can change the colour in a specific area. And usually this is what I do when I'm editing my images, because it's really, really good for getting selective about which colours you are manipulating in certain areas of the frame, especially when used with the point colour tool. Just a few little editing tips and techniques that I use. Hopefully they might help you out. But I just wanted to mention how light can be your biggest friend and also your worst enemy when it comes to colour in your photos. Now, I'm not going to dive too deeply here, but the direction and the angle of light can play a big part in how the colours are rendered in your final shot. So typically The lower the angle of light, the warmer that light will become until the sun passes the horizon, and then it gets cooler and cooler until there's no light left. So you can use this to your advantage for a multitude of shots if you so desire, or it could be working against you if you didn't want that kind of wash of colour. Now, when the angle of the sun is higher, we typically see more well saturated ranges of colours. Typically green will be green and blue will be blue. Now, the camera position can also play a big role in how your colours turn out in the final shot. So when the sun's behind you, or maybe to the side of you, or even above you, typically the landscape will be well saturated. But when the sun is straight in front of you and you're shooting straight at it, very, very quickly things become very, very washed out and flat. So yeah, getting your camera position right is absolutely critical, I think, for making the most out of the colour in your scenes. Now, I do go much deeper into colour theory and light in my ebooks, so if you fancy diving deeper into that, I highly recommend checking those out. And like I mentioned before, the links are down in the description and also on the screen. So I do hope you enjoyed this week's video. Thanks so much for watching. I do hope you got something from it. Maybe some of these techniques might help you out in your photographic journey. Anyway, if you did like this, please do consider subscribing for more weekly videos. Anyway, take care. I hope to see you again next week.